Somali healthcare companies are being exposed for fraud, and the scandal is making headlines everywhere. Yet the narrative often focuses on shock and outrage rather than reality, which is that this is primarily hurting American taxpayers who fund these programs. These companies have been taking advantage of loopholes, billing for services not provided, and inflating costs, all while the average citizen foots the bill through taxes, insurance premiums, and government programs. The media tends to sensationalize stories like this, portraying it as a rare or exotic crime, but in truth, these abuses are exactly what taxpayers are meant to protect against, and the fraud directly affects budgets that could otherwise go to legitimate healthcare services or programs that help people who truly need assistance. The exposure of this fraud should be a wake-up call, not just a viral headline, because it highlights systemic weaknesses in oversight and accountability, allowing companies to exploit public funds with minimal consequences. People across America need to understand the scale of this problem. Billions of dollars are being siphoned off in fraudulent claims, reducing resources for essential services, and creating a culture where companies are incentivized to cheat rather than improve healthcare delivery. At the same time, Americans are left to bear the indirect costs, from higher premiums to cuts in public programs, while those responsible for these abuses often evade meaningful punishment. While it's easy to get distracted by the sensationalism and emotional framing, the real takeaway is the financial damage to everyday taxpayers and the urgent need for reforms that prevent such large-scale exploitation. Transparency, accountability, and stricter auditing are critical to ensuring public money goes where it's supposed to, not into the pockets of fraudulent actors. This is more than just a story about scandal. It's about the consequences for the entire country and how Americans are impacted when fraud goes unchecked. Check out some of these videos.
So now we have politicians openly admitting that if they're elected, they're going to warn people about ICE doing their job.
Have a better communication between the mayor and the chief, and also the city council members, so that whenever we know something's coming down the pike, that city council is alerted immediately, because they're the connection point to community, and they can articulate that and disseminate that information to folks. I think that's really important.
As Minnesota, what are you doing? You're going to elect someone that's not going to prioritize law and order and the benefit of what? Being seen as a woke white person? Like, how did Minnesota become an annex location for Somalians? How did that happen?
The Somali fraud operation has to be one of the biggest political scandals in history. And the fact that nobody has been held accountable as of yet and nobody is in handcuffs is diabolical as hell to me. Ilhan Omar, how did you go from a $65,000 net worth just 3 years ago to a $30 million net worth just 3 years later? You have to make it make sense for me, because the math definitely is not mathing. At this point, it has to be the American people versus everybody, because the way that these people are just coming into our country and doing whatever the hell they want is not adding up to me. Y'all can say what y'all want, but if it was not for Trump, I do not feel like a lot of this fraud would even be coming to the forefront. And what's crazy to me is the fact that so many people are still rooting for and still campaigning for a Walz and Harris run. Let me tell y'all, if them two would have gotten in office, you think it would have been 8 billion? Baby, it would have been 80 billion. Trust me when I'm telling you.
To all you undocumented fraudsters out there, you might want to beware, because Trump, yes, Trump, just shut the door on your foolishness. This is Keith, the law enforcement OG, and folks, well, our president, Donald J. Trump, he finally shut down the scam. For years, a select group of Somalian nationals have been abusing Americans' generosity by siphoning millions through fraudulent means and government loopholes. And now, investigators, they warn that some of this fraudulent money.
All right, so this Minnesota fraud ring with the Somalis and the Al-Shabaab and the Tim Walz, I just want to break this down really fast. So a bunch of people from a country with about a 67 average IQ came to America, and instead of being like, hey, this is sick, we should just like the Americans, they said, no, let's funnel a bunch of tax money to the terrorist organizations that we escaped. And they did it under the guy who was running for vice president, who is in a heterosexual marriage.
You will be held accountable for your actions. You will be held accountable for your actions.
We are in Naples.
So get this, the Somali scammer that lied about the break-in to the daycare was doing so wearing $2,400 glasses. Yes, somebody pointed this out to me. One of my followers put it in the comment section. A lot of y'all have been talking about something that I missed, the fact that these glasses the Somali scammer was wearing are $2,400. I guess they're called Chrome Hearts glasses. Retail for $2,400. This is what scamming gets you. And mind you, at the same time, when Americans cannot afford groceries, at the same time when Americans are struggling so hard to put food on their plate, we've got veterans out here that are homeless, okay? We've got so many Americans in the United States of America that are struggling to survive right now. We have Somali scammers.
You know that Somali daycare that's in the news right now for all the fraud? I worked there, and I gotta tell you guys some of the stories about my day-to-day. First off, for some reason, the kids were always on field trips, or they were always doing something other than being in school. And I remember sometimes they would call me off work just on a random Wednesday, and I'd be like, why am I getting called off? And then other days I would come in there and I would just like clean the classrooms and always wondered why they were so empty. And like the paperwork never really matched up. Like Zachary also went by Max and had 3 birthdays on his paperwork. And I was always wondering, that was so weird. And then the other week I see on the news about the Somali fraud and how the paperwork was stolen. They robbed the daycare but only took the paperwork.
Ilhan Omar wakes up to federal arrest sweeping across Minnesota, and the reactions tell the story. I'll like the video right here. Follow for more, and let's jump into it. So while federal authorities move in on hardened criminals through Operation Metro Surge, Democrat leaders pretend this is about racism. It is not about race. It is about crime and public safety. Viewers see the pattern. The louder Omar and Tim Walz complain, the more people ask why they fear these arrests. Federal agents arrested violent offenders, including a convicted murderer and multiple gang members who have been released back into Minneapolis. Local families lived with the consequences. Those criminals are now in custody. Minnesota is safer today than it was last week. At the same time, the state faces a massive fraud crisis. Prosecutors already convicted more than 50 people with 80 more charged. Whistleblowers say the final number could reach $8 billion. That is why the scrutiny of Walz and Omar grows. Voters want to know why leadership failed to stop it, why warnings were ignored, and why suspected fraud grew into historic corruption. Instead of helping, Tim Walz defends the system. Ilhan Omar repeats the same claims about racism. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, that guy sucks, stages a public relations stunt at a Somali restaurant. None of that protects the public. None of that addresses the fraud. Viewers can see the contrast. Federal law enforcement takes criminals.
Yeah. waxaa la isku haystaa maqaayadii ismaar sida laga kala carama.
Somalis in Minnesota, Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar people have been caught stealing billions of dollars. Tax fraud amongst a whole bunch of other fraud. Money that was supposed to be sent kids with autism, amongst other things. And
Minnesota is going through it right now. They got all these millions of dollars in frauds that Tim Walz is getting caught for. On top of it, we're getting all them Somalian illegals out of there, not letting them take over Minnesota. That's crazy that anyone would be okay with that, especially the mayor going to a Somali restaurant, eating with them and all this stuff, trying to keep the Somalians happy.